Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Today's video will focus on several salient developments related to US-China relations and competition. Yesterday, Wednesday, Xi Jinping met with a group of more than a dozen US business leaders and scholars. Facing a slowing economy and a sharp fall in foreign investment, Xi sought to reassure American chief executives and others that China's economy hasn't peaked and that the country is working to improve its business environment. He also said the two countries should do more to overcome their differences and increase interactions. The group of 20 US business figures included Chubb's Greenberg, Blackstone's Schwartzman, and Qualcomm's Amon. They were already in China for the China Development Forum from the start of this week. Xi told the leaders that his government remained committed to reform, saying, quote, "China's reforms will not stall, and our opening up will not stop," end quote. Adding tellingly, quote, "China's development, having overcome various difficulties and challenges, has not collapsed, nor has it peaked," end quote. She met with US business leaders in November of last year during a dinner that was organized on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in San Francisco. That's also when he met with Biden. That meeting with business leaders was organized by the US Business Council and the National Committee on US-China Relations. European chief executives, who had also gone to Beijing this week for the China Development Forum, were not invited to this Wednesday meeting. It's reported that this was because it was organized in response to the San Francisco event. This new meeting underscores the elevated stakes for China, which needs continued buy-in from multinationals as it tries to shake the hangover from its pandemic isolation and housing crisis. The interaction with Xi also comes as American companies are getting squeezed by geopolitics, with sectors ranging from EVs to aircraft battling to stay competitive in the face of Beijing's industrial policy, a topic we will touch on shortly. Trade in semiconductors has also been disrupted by tight US export restrictions. Again, we will cover this shortly. Harvard scholar Graham Allison, who also attended the meeting, said that Xi also talked about avoiding the Thucydides trap, the concept known as the inevitable conflict between a rising power, Athens, and an established one, Sparta, adding that the US and China must balance their competition with recognition that each nation's survival requires that they also cooperate. Sean Stein, chair of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, speaking on the meeting, expressed yesterday, quote, "The US companies that are here to serve the China market or to sell into China, I think they're a little more positive than they were, say, a year ago. There are still deep structural issues that are holding the economy back, but the cyclical part seems to have improved, and so where they are in the business cycle is in a better place," end quote. Dennis DePaul, Global Managing Director at consultancy Roland Berger, speaking to UK-based Reuters, expressed today that there were more foreign visitors at this year's China Development Forum and at the Boao Forum for Asia, another international conference that opened on Tuesday. Quote, "It's more like 2019. I saw a lot more CEOs at the China Development Forum, and they were a lot more vocal," end quote. One unnamed chief executive of a large multinational company speaking to the UK-based Financial Times said the rhetoric from Beijing, including from Premier Li Qiang, who spoke at the opening of the forum, was more confident than last year. But he added, quote, "It was difficult to know whether this was an attempt to shore up investor sentiment or genuinely felt by the leadership, given the structural challenges in China's economy. It's very hard to call it at the moment," end quote. One US business leader at the China Development Forum was Apple's CEO Tim Cook, part of a charm offensive to the massive China market, and it's no wonder why. This week we learned that, according to China Academy of Information and Communications Technology figures, iPhone shipments in China fell about 33% in February from a year ago, extending a slump in demand for the flagship device in its most important overseas market. This was partly affected by the timing of the Lunar New Year. The February decline marks a second consecutive month of lower shipments. In January, the company shipped a total of roughly 5.5 million units, or about 39% fewer handsets than in the previous year. Apple shares have declined about 12% so far this year to date. marking Apple as an outlier among its big technology peers. Analysts explain that Apple's retail channels in China are still digesting the shipment from the fourth quarter of last year, which partially explains the drop. But, in addition, Apple faces informal bans of iPhones in government and state-run offices, which we have covered in previous videos, as well as stiff domestic competition, especially from Huawei. Again, a topic we have covered in earlier episodes. We also note, however, that the overall Chinese smartphone market contracted by almost a third in February, demonstrating a wider general weakening of consumer confidence. Next up, we move to trade and technology. If you're getting some value from today's episode, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Subscribing is also a huge help. All China Update episodes are free and open to all 6 days a week, and this primarily relies on subscriber support rather than corporate sponsorship. So if you'd like to help keep it that way, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Meanwhile, on Tuesday this week, one day before Xi's meeting with the American CEOs, China initiated dispute settlement procedures against the United States at the World Trade Organization in the interests of its electric vehicle industry, a growing area of tension between the two countries. China said it was contesting discriminatory subsidies under the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act that it said resulted in the exclusion of goods from China and other WTO countries. The US legislation aims to curb inflation, reduce the federal government budget deficit, lower prescription drug prices, invest in domestic energy production, and promote clean energy. The Brookings Institution last year estimated that the cost of the law is about $800 billion through 2031. The Chinese mission said on Tuesday, quote, "Under the disguise of responding to climate change, reducing carbon emissions and protecting the environment, these subsidies are in fact contingent upon the purchase and use of goods from the United States or imported from certain particular regions." End quote. World Trade Organization rulings on trade disputes are supposed to take 6 months after an adjudication panel is set up, but even if the WTO finds in favor of China, Washington could always appeal the decision. However, since December 2019, the WTO's top appeals bench ceased to function due to US opposition to judge appointments. Yet another symbol of the breakdown in global order and decoupling as the world shifts to a trade system of blocks. The US has criticized China's decision to file a complaint with the WTO over these subsidies for EVs. US Trade Representative Catherine Tai said in a statement on Tuesday, quote, "We are carefully reviewing the consultation request. Meanwhile, the PRC continues to use unfair, non-market policies and practices to undermine fair competition and pursue the dominance of the PRC's manufacturers, both in the PRC and in global markets." End quote. Indeed, as the US-based New York Times writes today, quote, "The Biden administration is growing increasingly concerned that a glut of heavily subsidized green technology exports from China is distorting global markets and plans to confront Chinese officials about the problem during an upcoming round of economic talks in Beijing." End quote. In a speech yesterday afternoon, Treasury Secretary Yellen laid out her plans to raise the issue of overcapacity with her Chinese counterparts. She warned that China's export strategy threatened to destabilize global supply chains and were developing around industries such as solar, electric vehicles, and lithium-ion batteries, saying, quote, "China's overcapacity distorts global prices and production patterns and hurts American firms and workers. Challenges for individual firms can lead to concentrated supply chains, negatively impacting global economic resilience." End quote. Adding later in the speech, quote, "It is important to the President and me that American firms and workers can compete on a level playing field. We have raised overcapacity in previous discussions with China, and I plan to make it a key issue in discussions during my next trip there. I will press my Chinese counterparts to take necessary steps to address this issue." End quote. Yellen is expected to make her second trip to China in early April, that is, in the next few weeks. And finally for today, Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post reports this week that there is growing anxiety about a widening gap in artificial intelligence. During a sideline meeting in Beijing at the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, CPPCC, Zheng Yi, a delegate who heads the Shenzhen-based China Electronics Corporation, said his firm has a long way to go to catch up with the United States. Quote, "Objectively speaking, despite the great efforts we have been making, our difference with the US is still huge," end quote, he said, adding, quote, "In a certain sense, as new developments in AI emerge exponentially, if no decisive and groundbreaking measures are taken, we are at risk of seeing an even wider gap. Problems in the development of information technology cannot be solved by creating application scenarios, nor through breakthroughs in scientific technologies. It is not even a problem about talent and basic research. It is about many things from all aspects. We are all very scared and anxious." End quote. China has relied heavily for its technology development on US chip imports and other crucial Western equipment, but US sanctions have constricted Chinese access to key tools, such as advanced graphics processing units from NVIDIA, which had up to 90% of market share in China's AI chip market. Now, both state-owned and private companies are under pressure to ramp up the country's domestic technology development. The South China Morning Post writes, quote, "While China's AI industry was generally seen as more competitive in the varied tech rivalry between the two countries, the latest launch of OpenAI's Sora and ChatGPT has raised questions about China's progress in catching up to the US." End quote. After Sora was launched last month, the State Council's State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission urged firms under direct control of the central government to embrace the profound changes brought about by AI. According to the China Academy of Information and Communications Technology, in terms of global computing power, including intelligent computing power from AI chips, China ranks second at 33%, after the US at 34%, and ahead of Europe and Japan at 17% and 4%, respectively. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a great Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.